He's finally losing it, my son-in-law said, laughing as he raised his glass across the Thanksgiving table, wandering around the property at 2 in the morning like some kind of ghost. Maybe it's time we talked about next steps, huh, sweetheart? My daughter, Claire, gave a small, uncomfortable smile and reached over to touch my arm. Dad, he didn't mean it like that. I looked at my son-in-law, Derek, and I smiled. The kind of smile a man smiles when he knows something nobody else at the table knows yet. You're right, Derek, I said quietly. Someone definitely needs to think about next steps. His smile flickered for just a second. Just a second. Then he laughed again and took a long sip of wine. He had no idea that the folder sitting in my truck, the one I'd driven 4 hours to bring, contained enough evidence to end his life as he knew it. He had no idea that the confused old man wandering the property had been taking photographs, recording conversations, and methodically documenting every single thing he'd done to me over the past 3 weeks. He thought he'd broken me. He'd actually just woken me up. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I spent 22 years as a forensic investigator for the county sheriff's department in rural Ohio before I retired, and another 6 years as a private consultant before my knees decided they'd had enough. I'm not a big man. I've got gray hair, a bad hip on cold mornings, and I wear reading glasses now that I absolutely hate. I look, by most accounts, exactly like the kind of old man you'd underestimate. Derek had made that mistake from the moment he met me. He married my daughter, Claire, 3 years ago. She was 41, freshly divorced, and happy in a way I hadn't seen since before her mother passed. I wanted to like Derek. I tried to like Derek. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming loud at parties, generous with compliments, always the one refilling your glass before you'd asked. But there was something underneath it I could never quite name, a stillness behind his eyes when he thought nobody was watching, a way he had of listening too carefully when money came up in conversation. Claire's inheritance from her mother was substantial, not life-changing for a billionaire substantial, but significant. A paid-off house in Columbus, some investments, and the farmhouse 40 acres of land, and an old 2-story house outside Millbrook, Ohio, that had been in our family for 3 generations. Her mother had loved that place more than anywhere on earth. I had loved it nearly as much. When Claire mentioned, 8 months into the marriage, that Derek wanted to sell the farmhouse, I didn't say anything. It was her property, her choice. But I noticed he brought it up at dinner, in front of guests, in a tone that made it sound like the decision had already been made. She sold it, or she thought she did. The deal fell through twice for reasons I still don't fully understand, and the farmhouse sat empty while Derek pushed for a third buyer. 6 months ago, Claire called me from the driveway of their house while Derek was inside. She was crying. Dad, I found something. She'd found a life insurance policy, taken out on her 14 months after the wedding. The beneficiary wasn't her. It wasn't her kids from her first marriage. It was a woman named Sasha Drummond, who, when I quietly ran the name through some old contacts, turned out to be a woman Derek had been seeing since before he and Claire had even gotten engaged. Claire didn't want to go to the police. Not yet. She was ashamed. She was still hoping she'd misread something, misunderstood something, that there was an explanation. I understood that. Grief makes people want alternate endings, so we waited. And I watched. The phone call came on a Thursday in late October. Dad, Claire's voice was controlled in that way. That means a person is working very hard not to fall apart. Derek suggested that you come stay at the farmhouse for a few weeks. He said you've been talking about wanting to fix the place up before winter, and he thought it would be good for you to have some space. He already talked to the real estate agent about delaying the listing. I sat with that for a moment. Derek had never, not once in 3 years, suggested anything for my benefit. Derek referred to me, when he thought I was out of earshot, as the old man. He'd told Claire twice that I was getting forgetful, and that they should keep an eye on things. He'd suggested, at a family dinner I wasn't supposed to know about, that perhaps I shouldn't be driving long distances alone anymore. Now Derek wanted me at the farmhouse, alone, for several weeks. I thought about Sasha Drummond. I thought about the insurance policy. I thought about the farmhouse, 40 acres, no neighbors within a mile, and a township road that flooded every November when the creek rose. Tell him that sounds wonderful, I said. Tell him I've been looking forward to it. I drove out the following Monday. I stopped at a hardware store in Millbrook first and bought several things, some of which were for the repairs I'd actually planned to make, and some of which were not. Old habits. The farmhouse was exactly as I remembered it. White clapboard siding gone slightly gray. The big oak in the front yard that Claire used to climb as a kid. The wraparound porch where her mother used to sit with coffee every morning and watch the fields. Standing in the driveway with my bag, I felt her everywhere. I felt all of it, 40 years of memory, in the grain of the wood and the smell of the air. I was not going to let Derek have this place. I gave myself one day to settle in and look around before I started paying close attention. The furnace was newer than I expected. Someone had replaced it recently. The landline still worked. The Wi-Fi, oddly, did not, though the router was plugged in and the lights were on. I filed that away. On the second night, I heard a truck on the road around 11. I didn't turn on any lights. I stood at the upstairs window in the dark and watched a set of headlights slow near the end of the long driveway, idle for a moment, and then continue on. Probably nothing. Possibly not. On the fourth morning, I found the first thing. I was going over the back porch, checking the boards. Some of them had been soft for years when I noticed the main support post had been worked on recently. The old bolts had been replaced, but the replacement bolts were the wrong size. They were seated just enough to look correct from a distance, but they weren't bearing any real load. The post was effectively decorative at this point. Anyone leaning on that railing, stepping out the back door, maybe, in the middle of the night when you couldn't sleep, the way I sometimes did, would go through it. I photographed it from 6 angles. Then I braced the post properly with materials from the barn, made it look like I hadn't touched it, and kept moving. On the 6th day, I found the water heater. The pressure relief valve had been adjusted. I won't explain the mechanics in detail, but what I will tell you is that a water heater with a compromised pressure relief valve is not something you want in a closed house. Under the right conditions or the wrong ones, it becomes something far more dangerous. The modification was subtle. It was also deliberate. Nobody accidentally adjusts a pressure relief valve. I photographed that too. Then I fixed it. On the 8th night, I stopped sleeping well and started sleeping lightly, the way I'd learned to do during a stretch in the late 90s, when I'd been working a case involving a man who knew we were watching him. You don't sleep less. You sleep differently. One ear always on. It was on the 9th night that I heard someone on the property. Not on the road this time. On the property. The crunch of frost-hardened ground, coming from the north side of the house near the old well. I lay still and listened. The sound moved slowly, paused, moved again. Someone who didn't want to be heard, which meant they almost certainly didn't know I was awake. I got up. I did not turn on any lights. I dressed in the dark clothes, the old boots I still keep because they don't creak, and I went downstairs through the kitchen, unlocked the side door that opens toward the barn, and stepped out. The night was clear and very cold, maybe 28 degrees. A half moon, enough light to see shapes. I moved along the wall of the house toward the north side, staying in the shadow of the overhang. The figure was near the old well cover, crouched down, working on something. The well hadn't been active in 15 years. We'd connected to the township water line in 2008, but the casing was still there, covered with a heavy wooden lid that I'd never gotten around to replacing with something proper. I watched for about 4 minutes without moving. Then I went back inside, went upstairs, and wrote down everything I'd seen in the small notebook I'd started keeping in my shirt pocket. Time, description, approximate height and build, what the figure appeared to be doing. In the morning, I went and looked at the well cover. The lock there was an old padlock on it. Mostly symbolic, had been replaced with a new one. The kind you could open with a key. The hinges had been oiled recently. I did not open it. Not yet. I photographed the new lock, the oiled hinges, the footprints in the frost that led from the north side of the property toward the road. Then I drove to Millbrook and made 2 phone calls from the parking lot of the hardware store because I did not trust the landline anymore. The first call was to a former colleague at the county, a woman named Patrice who'd worked evidence processing for 15 years and now worked independently. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment. "Walt," she said, "this isn't a landlord dispute." "No," I said. "It isn't." The second call was to Claire. That conversation was the hardest one I've ever had with my daughter, harder than telling her about her mother, because with her mother there was nothing anyone could have done. This was different. This was a choice someone had made about her, about me, about whether we would continue to exist in a way that inconvenienced them. Claire was silent for a long time after I finished. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm sure about the porch post," I said. "I'm sure about the water heater. I'm sure about the figure at the well. I'm sure about the lock." "Claire, honey, I need you to hear me. I'm not guessing." Another long silence. "What do I do? Right now?" "Nothing. You go home, you go to work, you act normal. Can you do that?" "I don't know." "Yes, you can. You're your mother's daughter." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. "I'm going to need a few more days," I said. "I want to know what's in that well." I opened the well on the 11th day, after I'd borrowed a game camera from my neighbor in Columbus, drove 3 hours round trip to get it, told him I was having deer trouble on the property. I set the camera up in the barn loft, aimed at the north side of the house, and I waited another 2 days before going back. The camera had caught something on the second night. The same figure, back again. Same time, same approach from the north. This time the figure carried something in what looked like a bag or a case, and left without it. I opened the well in the early morning, on a day when the sky was heavy with cloud cover and the light was flat and gray. I photographed the interior before I touched anything. At the bottom, in the dry casing, there was a waterproof case. Inside the case were documents. I won't describe exactly what the documents contained, because that information became part of a legal matter. What I will tell you is that they confirmed everything I'd suspected about Derek's intentions, and they added several things I hadn't known, including the name of a person he'd been working with, and a timeline that started, I realized with a cold and clarifying anger, about 6 weeks before he'd suggested I come stay at the farmhouse. I was not a spontaneous target. I had been planned. I rephotographed everything, replaced it exactly as I'd found it, relocked the well with my own lock, identical in appearance to the one I removed, because I'd bought one in Millbrook on my first trip to town, just in case, and went inside to call Patrice again. "How long do you need?" she asked. 2 weeks, I said. "Thanksgiving is in 2 weeks. I want to tell you about those 2 weeks honestly, because I think people sometimes imagine that a man in my position is calm, steady, certain. The truth is, I was none of those things all the time. I was frightened some mornings, not for myself. I stopped being frightened for myself somewhere around day 11, when the anger became clearer and steadier than the fear. I was frightened for Claire. I cooked dinner every night and ate alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Claire and her brother had done homework, where her mother had rolled out pie crust on Sunday afternoons, where 4 generations of our family had sat and argued and laughed and existed. I thought about all of it. I thought about what it would have meant if I hadn't paid attention, if I'd leaned on that porch railing in the dark, if the water heater had done what it had been set up to do. I thought about Derek raising a glass and saying something kind at my funeral. That thought steadied me considerably on the hard mornings. I completed the documentation. I made 3 additional trips to Millbrook. I spoke with a detective named Jim Fogarty at the county sheriff's office, not a colleague, someone new, someone who owed me nothing, and I walked him through everything, with the kind of methodical patience I'd spent 22 years learning. I gave him copies of everything. I told him I needed Thanksgiving. "Why Thanksgiving?" he asked. "Because he'll be there," I said, "and I want to be there when it happens." Jim looked at me for a long time. He was about 40, with the kind of face that's learned not to show too much. "You know I can't make any guarantees about timing," he said. "I know," I said. "Just be close." I drove to Claire's house the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I told her everything, all of it, in detail, in the order it had happened. She sat at her kitchen table and didn't speak for almost 20 minutes afterward. She cried. I let her cry, and I didn't try to fix it. Because there wasn't anything to fix right then. There was only the thing that was true, and the thing that was going to happen next. "What do I need to do tomorrow?" she asked. "Act like you don't know anything," I said. "Can you do that?" "I did it for 3 years," she said. "I can do it for 1 more day." I had underestimated her. I think I'd been doing that too, in my way. Thanksgiving morning was cold and bright, the kind of November day where the light has a particular quality to it. Clear and flat and without warmth. I helped Claire set the table. Her kids, my grandchildren, 11 and 14, were in the living room watching the parade. Derek came downstairs around 10, fresh showered, and shook my hand with both of his. Firm, warm, the full performance. "Walter," he said, "good to see you. How was the farmhouse? You get all your projects done?" "Most of them," I said. "It's a lot to keep up, but you know how it is with old things. Sometimes they're more resilient than they look." He smiled. "True enough." We sat down to dinner at 2 o'clock. Claire had cooked everything from scratch. The table looked the way it used to look when her mother made Thanksgiving. The good china, the cloth napkins, the centerpiece of dried corn and gourds she'd arranged herself. I sat at one end of the table. Derek sat at the other. Halfway through the meal, Derek set down his fork and picked up his wine glass. "I want to say something," he said. "I just want to say how grateful I am. For this family. For Claire." He looked at me. "And for Walter for making the drive, for taking care of the farmhouse. We're all relieved you're okay after those nights you were wandering around the property." He smiled. Had us worried for a minute. Claire's hand was flat on the table beside her plate. Not moving. Perfectly still. I looked at Derek and I thought about 22 years of sitting across from men who were certain they had the room, men who had planned carefully and executed cleanly and were already, in their own minds, past the moment of danger. I'd sat across from a lot of them. They all had the same quality in the moment before a particular kind of ease. The ease of a man who believes the story is already over. "Thank you, Derek," I said. "You know, I did a lot of thinking out there. Alone, in the quiet. You realize things about what's really going on around you." I reached under my chair and lifted the folder onto the table. "I found some interesting material while I was there," I said. "On the property." Derek's glass stopped halfway to his lips. I opened the folder. I'm not going to dramatize what happened next, because the truth of it doesn't need dramatizing. His face went through several things in a short period of time: disbelief, recalculation, something that might have been the beginning of an explanation, and then, before he got the explanation out, the front door opened. Jim Fogarty and his partner had been parked on the street since noon. My grandchildren went to the neighbors. Claire's hands shook for about 10 minutes afterward, and then she stopped shaking. The way her mother used to stop shaking, making a decision somewhere inside herself, and then simply not doing it anymore. I sat with her at the kitchen table after the house had quieted. The food was still on the table. Neither of us had eaten much. "I'm so sorry, honey," I said. She shook her head. "Don't. I should have. Dad." She looked at me. "You got it. You got all of it. Don't apologize for what you didn't know before you knew it." We sat there for a while without talking. Through the window, the light was going golden and long across the yard. The kids would be back in an hour. "Are you going to keep the farmhouse?" I asked. She thought about it for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." That was 7 months ago. The legal process is ongoing, and I've been advised to say little about the specifics, so I won't. What I can tell you is that Derek is no longer in a position to cause harm to anyone in my family. And the farmhouse, that old white clapboard house with the oak tree and the wraparound porch and 40 acres of Ohio fields, is still ours. I go out there on weekends sometimes. I fix the porch railing properly, new post, right bolts, the kind of work that lasts. I replace the well cover with a solid aluminum cap, the permanent kind. I walked the whole property line in early spring when the ground was soft and everything smelled like rain and new grass, and I thought about my wife, and about Claire, and about the version of events where I leaned on that railing in the dark and didn't know what I know. I thought about Derek at that Thanksgiving table, easy and certain, raising a glass, and I thought about what 22 years teaches you. That the most dangerous assumption a person can make is that age means diminishment, that gray hair means confusion, that a quiet man eating dinner alone at an old farmhouse has no idea what's happening around him. Experience doesn't make you slower. It makes you deliberate. It makes you patient. It makes you careful in ways that look, to people who are young and in a hurry and very sure of themselves, like weakness. It isn't weakness. It's how you win. If you're watching this, and you're somewhere in a situation that feels impossible, if you're the person everyone's written off, If you're the one they think doesn't see what's happening, I want you to hear this. Pay attention. Document everything. Don't move until you're ready. And when you move, be thorough. The story isn't over just because someone else decided it was. I'm Walter. I'm 67 years old. I have a bad hip, reading glasses I hate, and 40 acres of farmland that belong to my family. And I'm still here,